I'm not sure who I have here in the audience, but I thought I would just start off by just explaining who I was, but Paul's done a little bit of it. The Knowledge Transfer Network is actually a government agency. It's part of an organisation called Innovate UK, which, as Paul correctly says, looks at and fosters collaborations between businesses and universities for the purposes of developing new technology, and I'm particularly interested in environmental technologies. Why I started this little piece of research here, and I want to emphasise that it's very much research in progress. I started this piece of research because in the Knowledge Transfer Network we're a small organisation, a small government agency. We're looking to be a catalyst at stimulating innovation, and I was looking at the water sector to see what would be most helpful for us to be doing to try and stimulate people to undertake research, to develop new processes, new technologies, and so on. And we're particularly interested in technological development, actually. And the water sector is notoriously difficult as a sector to deal with. And I'll come on to some of the reasons for that in a minute. But I want to say that I was an academic for a long time. I haven't been an academic more recently for a number of years now. I still dabble with a bit of research. Actually, the most interesting thing, and I'm lecturing on this on another time, but the most interesting thing I do as a consultant is I trace dead bodies moving through rivers for the police. The lecture on that is in the autumn at Gresham College, so you might find it's more interesting than this, I don't know. The photographs are better. Okay, so here we are then. Innovation, resource efficiency and the UK water industry, a hopeless case. Right, we now have a problem with this technology, which also isn't working. Your clicker doesn't...
Shall we operate?
Yeah, we can do that.
If I bring it forward.
So you can just see it, what I'm talking about.
Well, you can see it on the screen.
Yeah.
But you may want to wander back.
I don't know, it's just not... Oh, well it's...
Yeah, I did it once.
Okay. Right, so, let's see, where can I stand? Okay, so there's been previous research on innovation in the water sector by a number of people. One of the people that I'm flagging up here is Duncan Thomas, who is a researcher at University of Manchester, and he was looking at this a few years ago, and he identified a number of problems with the water sector. And he said, actually looking at the water sector, and we'll come on to in a minute what the water sector actually is, but he said he identified problems, things like this very slow response time to long-term challenges. There are people in the supply chain, by that we mean people who make pipes and pumps and filters and so on, people there who are inventive, but the major water companies by and large are not. There are limited skills, there's a lack of collaboration and so on. So back in 2009 there was a big government investigation into this. It started off with a report done by the Council of Science and Technology, and it was picked up by something called the CAVE review, undertaken by Sir Martin Cave, and it was the report done by COST was actually on improving innovation in the water industry, i.e. a recognition that there was something of a problem. And the CAVE review was commissioned, and one of the main things that they were emphasising was greater collaboration amongst the stakeholders. Now, as I say in a minute, we'll come on to who the stakeholders actually are, but there was reference in this document to TSB, which is actually now Innovate UK, which is the organisation that funds my work. The old organisation that I ran, the Environmental Sustainability KTN, and then other people, utility skills councils and water companies and so on. And just flag up to you, there was consideration being given to something called a Water Innovation Platform, which is a government mechanism for bringing together funding for particular kinds of research, applied research and applied projects. So consideration, as it says here, was being given to a Water Innovation Platform, which would be the mechanism for injecting probably large sums of money, by which I mean multiple millions, into the sector to try and help the situation. Now, what I'm going to talk about today, particularly, a bit more on the cave review. They did recognise that since privatisation, and the water industry before the 1980s was essentially an industry owned by local government. Now, I don't know who we've got in the audience here, but it was owned by government, a number of organisations, regionally based organisations that were government controlled essentially, and it was privatised. It was sold off by the government. I'm not going to go into the details of that. It's extremely complicated and it happened in stages, but the point was this was intended, the privatisation was intended to be a mechanism for getting more investment into things like leaking pipes, pumps and so on, all the things we need to get the water from the reservoir to the tap. And they did say, the Cave Review did point out in 2009 that as a result there'd been £80 billion of investment. The implication was that it wouldn't otherwise have happened if it had been still owned by government essentially. But drinking water was safer, rivers and beaches were getting better and so on. But the cost to people who pay water bills, that's all of us in this room indirectly one way or the other, had gone up quite a lot since 1989. And there was, as it says on here, a backlog of infrastructure maintenance problems. Leaks, basically, was what was being talked about, leaking pipes. And how many of you here have studied the water industry before? Some of you. So somebody in this audience then will be able to tell me what the level of leakage is in UK pipes. A lot. Somewhere between 20, it's in inner cities it's higher than that, maybe even 50%. It was in some places back in the 1980s approaching 75% in central London, for example. Now if you think about that in terms of a supermarket, I'm sorry for those of you that have studied the water industry before, but if you haven't, if you think about it as a supermarket, if a supermarket had on its shelves an amount of cornflakes and they lost 75% of them before the till, they'd be concerned, right? The water industry was routinely doing that and nobody actually seemed to be doing too much about it. So hence the mechanism, the privatisation intended to invest in the infrastructure and also in things like treating dirty water and treating drinking water and so on. Okay, so it did some good, but it talked about, the Cave Review talked about the lack of investment in technology being variable, or the investment in technology being variable between companies in all sorts of ways, and being low, very low. The current figure for investment is probably less than 1%. This current investment in research and development is probably less than 1%. It's actually quite difficult to find out what the figure is. Paul may have a better idea than I do if you do the analysis, but it's pretty low. So small amounts of money relatively being invested in research and development intended to lead to innovation, and therefore low research and development intensity. Now, of course, the problem is probably not only with the big water companies that own or that manage large areas of water supply in large areas of Britain. The problem, people are pointing the finger at all sorts of organisations, including universities, as being part of the problem. And there's also some problem in research that's being supported by the European Union. I was a partner in a project, or my organisation was a partner in a project finished a couple of years ago called WaterDis. It was about dissemination, and it was a Framework Programme 7 project looking at money that had been invested by Europe into innovation in the water sector and what had happened as a result. So the money was invested in research. The research was by and large intended to deliver something in terms of innovation, development, improvements. What they discovered, what the project discovered, was that typically, if we looked at a number of projects, over 100 projects actually in total that had been funded, it typically takes 12 years to get from investment to application, which is a very, very long time when there are some pretty urgent and pressing problems. The users, potential users of the research, a lot of research projects were set up and they had a little committee, a steering group, and they had 1 or 2 people sitting on the steering group who were come from the water industry. And they were sat there and they were supposed to provide some sort of steer. In fact, what we found was that in many cases those groups very rarely met, and they felt that they had very little input into what the researchers, and by and large it was universities and private sector research organisations, very little input from the industry itself, which is the water companies and their supply chains, very little involvement of those potential users of research in framing the project or steering the project. We also found that the dissemination after the money had been invested, people in universities, not unsurprisingly, they want to put their results into peer-refereed academic journals and they want to go to conferences and deliver them. But actually that's not where the potential users of the research actually are. So the potential users of research don't read academic journals by and large, and they don't go to academic conferences. So there's a problem with dissemination. The other thing that we discovered, and clearly then most research, in fact what we discovered is most research doesn't yield useful application at all in the water sector, and if it does it takes 12 years, which is a very long time. One of the curious things we also discovered was that some research, actually, if you looked at the original proposal, and we had a panel of specialists looking at them, you just wondered what kind of application could ever have come out of it. The one that I would quote is, and I do apologise, I hope there's nobody in this room that was involved in it, but there was a wonderful project looking at comparing flood management policies, and it was in Spain, England and Thailand, and the conclusion was those were nice holiday destinations, we thought, when we were looking at it, but we couldn't actually see what the point was of doing that comparison, and it had cost an awful lot of euros. So there was a problem with EU-supported innovation as well. Some countries, though, are much better at getting value out of their innovation than the UK, and Germany is a good example. They've had a very concerted effort to invest in water, to bring the researchers and the users of research together, and they've put huge amounts of money into it, and they are now doing very well. So I say EU-supported innovation isn't brilliant, but some researchers in Europe are actually doing very well indeed. Okay, now if we just think about what the major challenges are for the UK water industry. This is the sort of thing we might spot. We've got a largely Victorian infrastructure out in the street there. We've got pipes that were laid down 150 years ago, some of them, perhaps longer. We've got sewers that overflow into rivers and pollute rivers at times of heavy rain. We've got customers complaining about the cost of it all. We've got a regulator, Ofwat. I'm sure you've heard of the regulators like Ofgem for the power supply, but Ofwat is the water equivalent. Ofwat telling or regulating the industry and telling them how much they can raise their bills by reviewing their business plans and commenting on, and that's a very strong level of regulation. We've got water quality challenges. We've got the Water Framework Directive, European legislation requiring clean-up. And the last one on here is an interesting one, contaminants in drinking water. Our powers of analysis in laboratories are growing more and more. And as that happens, and we look at the water we're drinking, we find in it more and more things that we didn't know were there. And some of them are not good for us, health-wise. So there's a problem in the sense that the problem is being uncovered. It's been there since the Industrial Revolution, actually, in some cases, but these contaminants are now being uncovered. There are other things, of course, like birth control pills and so on. Estrogen is now appearing in drinking water. And now we have the technology to measure it. We know that it's there as a contaminant. So those are some kind of challenges. There are some others as well, though, which, if you're an academic, commonly voiced things relating to carbon targets. and the increasing use of energy by the water industry. We're pumping billions of gallons of water, clean and dirty water, around the country. And because the regulations on water quality are tightening, we're focusing our investment on fewer and fewer pieces of infrastructure. So we're having fewer sewage treatment plants, we're having fewer water treatment plants, bigger ones, better ones, but the downside of that is we're having to pump water much further from one to the other and from those facilities to the consumer. So carbon targets, we've got a government, as a result of the government legislation, we've got a target for reducing carbon emissions, and the water industry trend is exactly in the reverse direction. It's going up. We've got the likely implications of climate change in terms of extremes and droughts, extremes of drought and flooding. We've got what are often referred to as nexus issues, this space between water, energy, food, and I've put in there waste, where growing populations in this country and everywhere else in the world are creating problems in that overlapping territory. Because we need more water, we need more energy, we need more food, and we're producing more waste. So somewhere in there we've got to manage that problem if humanity's going to survive. The other one I've got on there is Millennium Development Goals being renegotiated at the moment. That's an international issue, not just a UK water industry issue, but actually the research that's being done in the UK potentially has applications internationally and could do a lot for what is actually a basic human right for humanity to have access to an acceptable supply of water and sanitation. So those are the commonly voiced challenges which, if let's say in an academic audience, we might pick up some of those. Now, here's the water industry. Now let's just pause a minute and think what we mean by the water industry. If you ask people employed directly in the water sector, they'll tell you that the industry is largely those things on the left. It's the regional water companies, it's the regulators, it's government departments and local authorities, very closely regulated, restricted in what they can do by legislation. And then on the top part of the right-hand side is largely unregulated, but it's contractors, so people who build things, who install pipes, who make pipes, people who build facilities. Then we've got small companies, small and medium-sized enterprises. They might be organisations who, actually some of them, are making very innovative gadgets. Let's say special kinds of new filters that are really important for the industry. Or somebody I was talking to yesterday who's got a new gadget that bubbles oxygen through water much more efficiently, and that helps the water quality to improve, to clean up the water. So this is, on the right-hand side, the unregulated sector. We've got research organisations, including universities. There's a number of people in UCL doing research on water, very good research actually, and in many other universities. And there are also private sector research organisations. And then we've got charitable and voluntary sector organisations like the Canals and Rivers Trust, actually, who manage our canal, the UK canal network, and are responsible for some aspects of rivers, particularly for navigation. And then we've got other businesses. Now I say that because there are strange things in the water industry. We buy bottled water, for example, because we think for some reason there's something wrong with what's coming out of the tap. So other businesses have an interest in selling water, but they also have an interest because they are consumers of water. And if you haven't got water, you can't run a business. We'll come back to that that issue in a minute. But lots and lots of businesses have an indirect influence or relationship to the water industry. And then we have what I've put down there as customers, not the public. A few years ago, if you were talking about the water sector, you would have talked about the public interest, but we are now customers because the water industry is largely private and they're selling us water, so we're customers, at least in this country. Okay, now if you wanted to say who was at the centre of the UK water business, let's call it, I've put a target here. Some organisations are closer to the centre of this than others, but most of the ones on here have an interest of some sort. So you can see there that the water companies, there are 26 of them in Britain, no, England and Wales, I'm sorry. Some of them also have sewerage responsibilities as well. And you can see contractors and small and medium-sized enterprises. Then you can see academics and charities, but there's also trade associations, professional bodies, government departments, and so on, consultants. There's a whole raft of people here who have an interest in the water industry. It's hugely complicated. And just looking at organisations, the slide won't work for me. There are actually hundreds, just in the kind of, leaving aside companies, there are hundreds of organisations. There's probably at least 200. You can see this is in alphabetical order, and it's flowing wildly off the bottom of the screen. Hundreds of organisations also involved, all shouting at government, all saying this is what we want to do, and so on. Lots and lots of people. Now, if we don't know how many of you, if you're ever involved in anything to do with sustainability, you'll have seen Venn diagrams. There's always 3 circles, yeah? And it usually says something like social, environmental and economic. This is a 6-set Venn diagram. You can't draw any more than this without it being, well, without the shapes being really complicated. But I've just subdivided things into 6. The point I want to make here, of the 6 clusters that I've got on there, is that actually, if you're trying to do any research on this about opinion, which is what I was trying to do, you find that any one individual sits in far more than one set. So it becomes very difficult to say, if I speak to Paul Eakins about his view as an academic on the water sector, he's also a customer. He might also be a consultant. He might also have shares in a water company. So I don't know, but it becomes quite complicated. Okay, so the sector is complicated. What I set out to do was to try and find out, as I mentioned earlier, the most effective thing that the knowledge transfer network could do to try and stimulate innovation in the sector. And I did all the usual things that academic researchers do, literature reviews, some semi-structured interviews across all of those different groups. I did 65 interviews, another 20 conversations. You don't know who the individuals are representing, so it's difficult to separate out their views, but that was the data collection. Now, the other thing that's important to think about is what actually is innovation? We want to get innovation, we want to get better things into the sector. Well, I'm showing you this. This is a house in Germany. It's wonderful. When it rains, you can see the pipes running down the front of the house. When it rains, the house plays music. As the pipes go down, the water makes this wonderful sort of humming and rushing and gurgling and singing and resonating noise. So innovation, right? It could be, the point I want to make here is innovation could be something creative and technical. If you ask people in these various groups what they mean by innovation, some of them would say, oh, well, in theory it's something like this, something new for the first time, transforming something we haven't previously imagined, like the house we just saw. But they also make a lot more comments. Now, some people in the water business, the water sector, put forward abstract ideas about what innovation is. So they talk, the first one there talks about meeting user and environmental needs and goals without costing more. This one's quite important, and these are just some of the responses I had, obviously. Not just technology, but smart thinking. Core components will require technology, but there's a lot that's not actually about technology. And then Some people say, oh, well, it's about incremental change. Small changes in what we do that can gradually improve things. Those are innovation. The one that I found curious was a number of people said to me, oh, well, if the water company changes the way it bills its customers, that's an innovation. And I'm thinking, well, yes, but it's not really going to do much in the face of challenges to the planet, is it? So there's a problem, and you can see there somebody else saying the same thing. We get improvements in billing systems, and that's not innovation, they're saying. A very small minority of people talk about sustainability at all. They also very rarely mention things like climate change. It's mostly, and certainly in those central areas of that diagram, those core organisations, the companies and the big contractors, they talk about the cost. That's mostly what they talk about. It's about saving money, doing something to save money. So it's not about sustainability for most people. They do also give concrete ideas, and I use the word concrete advisedly because normally when they talk about an innovation, they're talking about, or very often they're talking, engineers talking about something that is actually concrete, but not always. We've got some others on here. What would an innovation be? Well, it could be, we want a total city simulation that could run forward for 50 years that would show us what's going to happen to how much water we use, what happens to it, the quality of it, and so on. We want forecasts about our infrastructure. We want to use games to help people to manage their water. There's one there for the ecologists. An innovation, and it's actually happening now. People are now being able to say, well, we don't need to do a survey for newts. If we want to build something and we've got an ecologically valuable area, it's got newts in it, we don't have now to look to the newts because we just analyse the DNA that's in the water and we can say, well, there are newts here or there aren't. Which is a big innovation, actually, because often newts are one of the things that may hold up a building programme. You're looking for newts. You have to wait for the end of the year or the spring or whatever until the newts appear. If you can analyse whether they're there or not from the DNA in the water, you don't have to wait. Some people think that's a good thing. We want to be able to use big data. We want to be able to use water itself smarter. These are all quotes. Using water smarter more than once for different things. For drinking, for bathing, for taking perhaps food waste away as a mechanism from which we can recover energy from sewage and so on. So there's lots of things, ways in which we could innovate there. So that's industry's views of innovation. And I just want to emphasise, it's not only about the hardware, but some of it is about the hardware. And actually, the things that I'm interested in tend to be further to the right-hand side of this spectrum. I'm quite interested in innovations in the water sector that are going to position us in the UK for the next 50 years. And that's going to be some big changes required. It's not going to be changes in the billing arrangements on the left-hand side. It's going to be big changes somewhere over on the right-hand side here. Managing water and energy and waste together, for example, or completely altering the way we tackle some projects. I mean, why, for example, thinking the impossible or the improbable, why do we have waterborne sewage systems, for example, in this country? So there's big things over this end that might be innovation. By and large, the radical thinkers that I've been interviewing, the ones who contemplate things on the right-hand side of the diagram here are not the people in the centre of that target. They are the small companies, some of the consultants, some universities, not all, and some of the charitable organisations are much more radical in their approach. When I was interviewing people, I asked them whether there was a problem. I say here the overwhelming majority Is there a problem with innovation in the water industry? I've shown a nice set of scales almost in balance here. Of the 65 people I interviewed in detail, the vast majority said there was a problem. Is there a problem? Yes. And people started to talk about what the problem was. Big companies, they can't be creative. People get uncomfortable with change. General things like the UK has lost its lead because since privatisation, nobody's investing any money in research. You can see there one there at the bottom. Some companies are innovative, but it's the same ones over and over again. It's not widely spread, and so on. Those are the sort of things. I could put up hundreds of quotes here, clearly. And I have to say, on the balance, only one person that I interviewed said there wasn't a problem. And if you look at what they said, even they're hedging their bets. They said, oh, well, no, I don't think there's a problem, but it might be just I'm looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. And anyway, in a rather defensive way, this person said, perhaps we can't solve all problems anyway. So, is there a problem? No. Most people say there is a problem, and a few people said that there might be a problem, but they weren't really sure. Again, lots of reasons for that. Interesting one at the bottom there, there's a problem in England but not in Scotland. Scotland has plenty of water, I think. Things like that, things like this one here. Limited innovation isn't a problem because the industry is fit for purpose anyway. It's functioning. We trust the water that's coming out of our taps, and it continues to come out of our taps, so there's not a problem. Okay, so most people, the vast majority of people, were saying there was a problem, and they started to identify what it was. Now, a lot of people identified very specific things, those leaking pipes, rivers disappearing through over-abstraction, flooding happening after heavy rain, carbon dioxide emissions and so on. Somebody said flooding is the second largest risk after pandemic flu. I don't actually think that's true, but it's probably close, perhaps. People talked about really toxic wastes being generated, which we can't deal with. Very few people mentioned anything like the second one. I just put it down there because I think it was the only one, actually. Some people did refer to those Millennium Development Goals, those international goals, but very few, actually. And they talked about the general, as well, general challenges. Water's too cheap. Another problem, another challenge, we don't innovate in terms of how we treat our water, the processes, and we don't have any way of testing technologies in the UK because the companies are all competing against each other. They don't share their research results, that limited research that they do. Somebody here says, we were hoping that TSB, Innovate UK as it is now, would fund an innovation platform, you remember that one, for water, but it didn't happen. Radical changes. There's not enough environmental challenges. You know, there isn't enough drought and enough flooding in this country yet to stimulate things, but perhaps there will be in the future. So, general and specific challenges. I asked them, where is the problem? Now, this is an interesting question, and again, I've got hundreds of quotes on here, and I'm not going to go through them all. Basically, when you ask somebody where's the problem is with another organisation other than theirs. So the closer you are to the centre of that target, the more likely people are to blame somebody else. So the water companies would blame the regulators would blame the water companies, everybody blamed, quite a number of people blamed the universities actually. People blamed, well, almost everybody, pension companies, lack of leadership, government departments and so on. So where and why has the problem arisen? This is internal to the sector, and I could go on, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I like this one. It's difficult to talk to universities. They're clever people, but the language is too complex. And that's a genuinely articulated view. It's very widespread across people who work in the water sector. Yeah, another one, which I may have, no, I haven't got it up on here, but another quote about universities. It's always standing in a university, it's interesting to talk about the staff and views of the staff, but they say these universities, they're just too slow. You know, we can't, they have a research grant that's 5 years, and we don't want a 5-year project. We want a project where we get the results next year, because we've got to buy it and build it. So it's very common. I mean, conversely, if you ask universities, they say the industry wants to move too quickly. You know, we can't possibly generate research, well-founded research in a year. We're going to need a 4-year project. So where and why has the problem arisen depends on where you're sitting in on that target. A lot of people blamed the regulator. They said they're keeping the price too low. The companies they're just supporting customers' bills. They're not allowing the industry to innovate because there's no money left to do any research. There is a research organisation, a small research organisation called UCWER, UK Water Innovation and Research, I think it is, Water Innovation Research, say their research is too close to the market. It's not really innovative. It's more about the billing than it is about really radical stuff. Here we are. Here's one on universities. There's too much research and development invested in universities. And not enough in private organisations. Higher education isn't properly managed to do applied research. There's too much blue skies, not enough application, and so on. Here we are. University researchers. I don't know whether anybody here that would resonate with that one. University researchers feel that big companies will grab their intellectual property. And business money would be dirty. So NERC, the Research Council, is a much easier source, and you don't even have to report back very much. They just give you the money. I don't know how many of you have tried getting Research Council money, but that is a commonly held view. What's the solution? Now, this is a difficult one, isn't it? There was some research done, published in 2015, looking at solutions to innovation problems in the water industry. It was a rather a slim piece of work, actually. It made a number of general points. The first 4 on this list, actually, were the key ones. It talked about you've got to have a supportive culture at the water utility. The company's got to be interested in innovation and research. There's a kind of bit of a circularity about that, isn't there? You've got to have a regulatory regime that allows or even promotes innovation. And you've got to have some cash to do it. And you've got to have public backing. Will the public actually say, oh yes, we're happy to pay more in our water bills if they do some research in those water companies or in those universities? Most of those things at the moment, we would say, don't exist. And then there's some more just pick up the last one. We need some long-term thinking. We don't just need companies thinking, how much am I going to charge customers in the next 5 years, but how are we going to exist and what are we going to look like in 25 years? Lots of solutions. I can't begin to tell you how many solutions were offered to me. Probably from 65 interviewees, 300 or 400 solutions to this, which we can't possibly deal with all of them. Now, a couple of things I want to sort of start to draw out of this. I can't show you all the results of all the people I've interviewed. You'd all be asleep, and the print would be too small. There's a general issue about innovation, which is whether the government can actually stimulate innovation at all. Now, if you say, well, there's a problem with innovation and somebody's got to do something about it.
You've spoken for quite a long time. You haven't yet mentioned the Water Industry Act of 2014. I'm just wondering whether that
just stay with me a minute, will you? We'll get to the... There's an issue about whether government can stimulate innovation generally. The government role in, and the 4 points made on here were made by American pundits, saying the government role in research and development is not necessary and it's not sufficient to get anything to happen. Often government investment in research is following the private sector anyway, so it's a waste of money. It's not only a waste of money, it's actually damaging because it stops private sector, or you get failures in it which actually damage the private sector. And there's a quote there from Kenneth Boulding: nothing fails like success. Even those things that work actually can be quite damaging in some other regard. So I don't agree with this. I think there is a role for innovation and stimulating innovation from by government. And I've just put this up just to illustrate what might be done by an organisation such as myself, my own, the Knowledge Transfer Network. Now, there's a number of things here. When I talk to people, the people we'd interviewed about innovation and what needed to be done, the things they talked about ranged from sharing information, putting out more information, making relationships between, say, businesses and universities, right through to grabbing government ministers and telling them what ought to happen. Now, as an organisation, actually, we do occasionally have meetings with government ministers and government departments, but there's clearly a spectrum of things here that you could be doing, and from left to right. And actually, people, if you ask people in the sector, they want all of these things to be done to try and change things. The most influential things that you can do come somewhere over here, which is not actually about pushing out information on a website or organising some meetings to tell people about university research, but actually to influence the context, the philosophy that people are adopting when they approach innovation. So those are the kind of things which could be done by government, as well as putting funding into innovation in companies. The people I talked to also talked about new technologies, and again there were hundreds and hundreds of new technologies which people mentioned as being likely things. If you talk to people in university researchers, of course, it's always their technology that's the one that's really going to make it. But there's lots. Again, I'm not going to run through all of them, but what I will say is that I don't know how many of you have come across this before. This is anybody seen this diagram before? The hype cycle for technologies? It's always an interesting one to think about, because what Gartner is an American set of economic analysts, and they've been producing diagrams for the last 15 years or so, I think, showing the pattern of particular technologies in terms of their adoption. And what they say is that every technology goes through this cycle. It starts off, somebody invents something, and everybody gets really excited about it. You know, this is going to be absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, it doesn't work quite as they thought it would, so you go into this trough of disillusionment, and then there's a slope of enlightenment, and maybe at the end there's a plateau of productivity before it falls away again because something else has appeared that's going to do it better. Now, they haven't produced one for the water sector, but they have produced a general one. This is the most recent one, and some of the things that are on here relate very strongly to things that were mentioned by people that I interviewed in my small project. So, for example, they talked about, or Gartner identified, connected homes. This is where apparently you can manage your home, your heating, your water, your fridge or whatever from your phone. As you know, before you go home, or your cooker, presumably. Connected homes. There's something in there on data science, how we actually handle large volumes of equipment. There's the Internet of Things. Are you people familiar with the Internet of Things? Yes? No? Yeah, I find this actually rather worrying myself, the Internet of Things, and I like the way it's sitting up there, because you know the example that's always given is that your fridge is going to phone Tesco for you and get your food delivered, and I've got this nasty concern that the bathroom scales is going to tell the fridge not to do it, or only to order salad or something. But and Tesco's gone bust anyway. Yeah, but anyway, you know that at the moment, that's according to Gartner, that's at the peak of inflated expectations, but in theory it might be useful. We've got big data, we've got gamification, using gaming by telling people, oh, you're using a lot more water than your next door neighbour, so if you let's play a game and see if you can get your water use down, that kind of thing, right through to consumer telematics and so on. So any one technology, I think this is a pretty good summary of what happens. So any technologies that are suggested by people, we'd have to start thinking, where are they in this pattern? And some of the things that were being suggested clearly are already over on the right-hand side here. We're doing quite well at the moment, for example, on managing pipe networks, the pressure in water pipes to stop them bursting. And there's research going on that, which is quite close to application. We're also getting much better in the UK at fixing leaks, although we've got a long way to go to actually address them all. Now, I want to leave you with a thought about what it is we're actually trying to do here and where universities come in this. I had some involvement in the flooding in the River Severn in summer 2007. I was the advisor to the County Council after the event, I have to say. Those of you that were in the UK then, this was a very big deal. The insured damage was something around £3.2 billion. Large areas of urban areas and rural areas were flooded, and it was described as the largest peacetime emergency since the Second World War. That's what it looked like. You've all seen it, and flood management is clearly a water sector problem. One of the key things I just draw to your attention is that 400,000 people lost their mains water supplies for up to 21 days. Now, actually when that happens, you very quickly revert to something approaching medieval conditions. If you imagine living here, let's say you were living here and you lost your water supply. So for a few hours it's okay, you can cope, you go round to Costa and get a coffee instead of having a drink of water or whatever. By the end of the day you're getting a bit fed up because your toilet won't flush. And after 12 hours, it's getting pretty serious, and you're starting to think, okay, where's the nearest source of open water? Now, that was exactly what went on in Gloucester, for example, and it's not nice, okay? 21 days is very serious, and all sorts of things had to follow that. So it's a big problem. Now, the point I want to illustrate from this is, one of the things that's built into the new arrangements for water is a requirement to focus on resilience. We need a resilient water industry. That's a long-term objective. The point that I would just flag up to you is, what is resilience? I don't think we actually know. I think this is a really good challenge for universities to address. What do we mean by resilience? It could be that we mean we bolt together lots of networks over long distances. We bring water long distances because that way we can get around local problems. Or it could mean that we use smaller scale local initiatives, local self-sufficiency. So I don't think we know which of those is the more resilient at the moment. So it's fine to say what is resilient, and the Ofwat, the new regulators, built that as a requirement for the industry, but I don't actually think we know the answer. We could have some ideas about what we mean about resilience, but it probably we could include things like, we want a resilient industry that's going to generate wealth for the country. We want to be able to sell our technology overseas, and we can't do that at the moment. So resilience could do all of those things. Now, what I've demonstrated is there's a big problem in the water industry, has been, still is. So the Cave Review in 2009 said there's a problem. There's still a problem, according to the vast majority of people you talk to. What I want to flag up, though, and this is my point at which I'll end, there is some reason for optimism. And the last couple of years, there has been a change. The change has been very marked in Scotland, where they've just recently started some time ago something called Scotland Hydro Nation. They're making themselves a centre for innovation in the water sector. And I just heard this afternoon that they've agreed a large physical test centre and an innovation service for the water sector and so on. So interest in innovation in the water sector is suddenly picking up. I can't tell you why, but it's happening, and there are a number of indicators that suggest that that's happening. It might be the research excellence framework in universities that's focusing on impact, I don't know. But it's certainly happening at the moment. There is cause for optimism, and there is, I think, a reason for universities, certainly, and businesses to work together more closely to actually generate some of this innovation that we really, really need. And to take the long sight, the long vision that's going to get us there. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, you need a drink of water.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. And not a hopeless case, apparently, therefore. A glimmer of hope on the
A glimmer of hope, yeah.
We're going to have a few minutes questions, see how long that takes us, and then we may decamp upstairs for some refreshments. So, who would like to ask a question? I've got a gentleman here, and then we'll go over to that side. Please introduce yourself.
Graham Stevens, Blue Green, UK. Do you have any evidence of actual repression of innovation? Repression or blocking or hiding?
Well, certainly the people I spoke to in large companies, they said that the culture is very anti-innovation. And although some of the large companies are now starting to say they are interested in it, in fact, that they don't want boats rocked. So it's a very interesting question. As I said, I think it's more likely that innovation now is arising with the consultants, the people further away from the centre of that target that I showed. And a number of those are actually very open to innovation. I mean, there are, I don't know, are you allowed to advertise, or is it like the BBC?
You can say what you like.
Well, I mean, just down the road, just down there, you've got Arup, for example, who invest 7% of their turnover, is it? I can't remember what the figure is, 7% anyway in R&D, whereas the average for the sector is still probably around 1%. So, you know, that's an example where it's not being repressed. But I can't actually answer, because the voices, the cacophony of voices would have very mixed views on that, I think. Do you have an example you're thinking of yourself?
Well, I'm in court against the Secretary of State for what is called in legal terms shutting his ears.
Right. How interesting.
Okay, that's something I think for afterwards over your glass of wine there. Gentleman there.
Hello, my name is Bora. I'm a PhD student at Imperial. I'm researching a bit around innovation and water, and I have a bit of a sort of maybe slightly cheeky question.
That's fine.
Where on the hype line would you say innovation lies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I suppose, I mean, if you go back to the beginning, there are so many different definitions of innovation in the first place. So, I mean, I think innovation is, I want to see something fairly radical, and I want to see something, and I want to see it implemented. So, it can be anywhere. And also the actual curve, what Gartner say is it can be varying levels of compression, you know, so some things go through this very quickly. I mean, the basic innovation, I suppose, in the technology has got to be over on the far left-hand side. And you want to get over that hump pretty quickly and get something actually meaningful happening. So, I don't know is the short answer. But as a scientist myself, I tend to think of it's coming over on that left-hand side.
Can I just come back very quickly?
Yeah.
I just meant more as the term innovation and this idea. I just think that there's a lot of hype around this term innovation, but the term itself isn't very necessarily clear to define.
So how would you define it then?
Oh, I don't know. It's some sort of change. Well, I don't know. There's different definitions, like you say. But what I wanted to sort of hint at is that I think it's maybe overhyped, this idea of innovation.
Okay.
Another conversation for everybody. Sarah.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm kind of noticing here, though, a bit of that perhaps a contradiction. Perhaps you just said that what you want is radical innovation and you want it to be implemented.
Well, I want some shifts in what's going on. Yeah.
But, perhaps you're asking for a bit too much or asking for the impossible there. So when you showed your slide of incremental innovation from building systems through to really radical innovation, and you mentioned timescales there, and you said, these might be innovations that we're looking at in 50-year kind of time frames, and you gave the example.
Sorry, that one. That one.
Yeah, and the specific example you gave there was of waterless sanitation.
Perhaps, yeah.
So myself and my colleague Paige Hay have done some research on waterless sanitation. We've not been successful in getting it funded. We have, we're friends with our local water company. They've not said it's a bad idea, but they're not going to fund it because that's not their business. And so I'm just there's a bit of a contradiction there between truly radical innovation that may or may not work, or truly radical research that may or may not work. And so therefore is likely to fit into what you started with as useless research. So you gave this whole review of all of this research that had been funded in Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
And it hadn't been applied, so therefore the implication being it was a waste of money.
Well, it's not necessarily a complete waste of money, but the project there was actually looking at the way it was disseminated, and the problem with it is that some of the research might have actually been quite good, but nobody had heard about it.
Yeah, so anyway, can you just talk a little bit more about this actual challenge between wanting to see truly radical change and yet wanting it to be implementable in a relatively short time frame? That there seems to be a bit of a different contradiction there.
Yeah, there is.
Perhaps actually, if we are trying to figure out what is the role of universities in this sector, some clarity around that might.
Okay, like all of these things, it's like another lecture, isn't it? You've mentioned timescales. The other scale, of course, is spatial scale, and that's pretty important too. Now, for example, there's a very interesting water company called Albion Water.
Going bust.
Perhaps.
Too much R&D?
Perhaps. They've had a number of projects where they are managing the whole water cycle within, an area. It's a suburban area of a town. There's an area of London as well. That's been much more problematic, actually. What their solution is a much more integrated approach to managing utilities. So water, waste management, power they're looking at as well. So trying to integrate all things together at some kind of scale which is resilient, whatever resilience might mean. And they've managed to develop it, and they are, as you're hinting, early pioneers, and that's problematic in its own right. But they've been trying to implement it at quite a small scale. You could actually think about that kind of thing happening much more widely, but to get it adopted much more widely is going to be clearly much more problematic. So I can't answer your question in terms of timescales, but I'm just simply adding in that there's another scale, which is the spatial scale, which you have to focus on.
Albion Water have kind of done that as a private.
Well, they are a regulated company, actually.
Yes, but actually in terms of innovate, I'm not aware of any particularly strong university involvement in that case. So again, this is just landscape of innovation of...
It's been reviewed by, one of the projects has been reviewed by Exeter, I think, actually, but only afterwards, you're right.
But no kind of deep engagement in terms of producing results from university research and having a quick turnaround. So,
no, you're right, that's right.
It is very complicated, as you said, and it's still not clear really what our role as university is.
No, and as I say, I think it depends on your perspective. There's plenty of people around saying universities have no role. Hopeless basket cases, some people would say. I didn't put up the most challenging of the comments, but and the converse is also true. Commentators from universities commenting on the philosophy behind water companies and some of the other contractors being equally inappropriate in actually trying to generate solutions to problems that we are facing.
I'm going to come to a question here, and then I'm going to go to the gentleman there. We've got oodles of questions coming up here. We could be here all night. Right.
Well, I might have been clean.
with a short comment on the innovation question that was raised earlier on. There is a commonly used definition that has been developed by the OECD.
Yes.
That in essence leads to the conclusion that innovation also takes time. And the graph that you also indicated here leads us also to conclude that it takes time to innovate, where a number of actors need to be involved, including indeed universities. When we take wind energy as an example, where we had the first demonstration projects back in the 70s, it's not yet a fully mature mass market. So this process is risky. It is laborious and it takes time. And in 12 years, you indicated probably rather a short time frame when you look at the more fundamental disruptive innovation that's needed. What I wanted to ask you is whether the last 2 years, wouldn't you think that there has been a change in the attitude to water? One of the emergency calls I noticed was the CDP Carbon Disclosure Project survey made among industries worldwide, with the finding that 60% of the water using industry is extremely worried that in the future there will be water scarcity. So they call upon water utilities, water providers, water technology providers to make them more resilient, in that they need to be able to cope with water stress situations. So the situation to me is that there is a clear call for water utilities or other providers to become more innovative. There's presumably also a willingness to pay for joint innovation collaboration processes. And from that perspective, also recalling that the water utilities responded, oh yes, we are willing to do something. I would think the last 2 years have indicated a stronger need, and probably also a higher probability that we can see more innovation coming on stream. It might be an overlook.
No, I agree with you. I do agree with you. But I think it's interesting that that driver is coming from industries other than the water industry. It's coming from Unilever and Marks and Spencers and so on. Yeah, and that's why I put on, I couldn't find the slide, but that's why I put other businesses on one of the slides, and I mentioned retail as an example. But you're absolutely right. And I think there is some cause for optimism for that reason. And I think also, certainly in the UK at the moment, that some of these businesses are leading government in environmental challenges, not just water, but a whole raft of others as well.
Also the energy.
Gentlemen here.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Ridley. I'm working as a consultant on a GIZ sponsored project on water at the moment. I think, Caroline, you're right at the moment that there's been very little R&D, and I think it's for two reasons. The industry, generally naturally monopolistic, they don't really compete, they just benchmark against each other, so, and heavily regulated by Ofwat. Secondly, heavily debt financed, and equity's been exiting the sector for the last 10 years. But I do think, and you didn't mention it, the Water Industry Act of 2014 I think is a really helpful step forwards, because Ofwat is now introducing competition in the non-household retail sector, which is a small part.
It's just very small though.
It's exciting. And in their Water 2020 project, they're looking at introducing competition in other sectors. And I take a quite simplistic view, which is as soon as you get competition, you'll get a return of equity funding who will look at innovative ways to try and make money. And you'll get innovation coming in as a response to that. You've also had, for the monopolistic companies, a move towards TOTEX regulation as opposed to CAPEX, so there'll be less gold plating, and there'll be more thought about how to meet outcomes in a flexible, innovative way. So I think both for the naturally monopolistic parts of the industry and the competitive, you're going to have a quite large step forward in innovation.
You may well be right, and in fact I didn't dwell on it, but a new, my last slide, I think there's a new organisation, the UK Water Partnership, has just been established. Where's it gone? Yeah, the first one on my list there, and I was at a meeting of it this afternoon, and Ofwat is there as well, and it's all about stimulating innovation, and the person from Ofwat was being extremely positive about it, which, if it happens, if they are genuinely buying into this, would be a really good thing. The Finance is an interesting thing though, because it's not just about most commentators would say that this is not just about the money and cannot just be about the money. So however the money flows into or out of the sector, that's not the only thing that should be driving it. And there should be things that are softer targets as well, or softer aspirations, let's say, as well.
Gentleman here.
Andrew Ross from Global Garden, looking at the bond market approach to this, and the soft landscaping aspect of resilience as highlighted by the Natural Capital Committee,
Yep.
showing that there's a net added value of £546 million per annum from planting woodland on watershed catchment areas. That alone has now begun to bring together local enterprise partnerships. Oxfordshire, London, Kent, Severn, the anti-flooding capacity of woodland on as a natural sponge is just obvious and scientifically established. That is now enabling bringing in the Forestry Commission and big players like Savills, the estate agents, looking at the property values of turning agricultural land in the green belt, this kind of arable field that's got a horse in it, and a farmer saying, "Get off my land." You turn that into woodland around London that is actually a natural sponge holding the water. It's a real resilience matter that fits the climate change agenda and fits the money market desire to invest in this kind of arena. And so the opportunity to link it together here in a much more holistic way, rather than just the technology.
No,
I don't want to comment. I don't hear a question there.
Rather than the hard technology, rather than the hard.
I will just comment briefly. I agree with you on the sponge effect. I'm a hydrologist, and one of the things I do is SUDS arrangements, sustainable drainage schemes. But a couple of queries, a couple of things. When I interviewed people, and what I was putting up here isn't my opinion. This is the opinions of people that I interviewed. Only 2 people out of 65 mentioned natural capital or any kind of offsetting or anything of that sort in that arena, which is disturbing, I think, because there's a lot going on in government at the moment about that, and I don't think the story's being told very well, actually, and it's another example of where it's not being got out very well. But I think you're right. I think anybody, there might be arguments about if it's £575 a hectare or whatever.
Okay. Now, we normally pack up around about now. I know there's a gentleman at the back who's been waiting some time to ask a question. How many other questions have we got? Still a lot. Well, some of them are going to have to wait and be one-to-one. So I'm going to take 3. I'm going to take this gentleman at the back, so he's been waiting a long time, this gentleman to the right here, and that gentleman there. And then we're going to just take those 3 together, and then Caroline's just going to wrap up. So we'll start at the back.
Okay, so I'm Dan Etz, and I was head of sustainability on the Olympics, and I ran in the implementation of black water treatment plant, half a mega heat on the Olympic Park. And it was part R&D project with Thames Water. They were impossible to work with. But what was even more difficult was that Ofwat put a real cap on their ability to invest in this project. They weren't kind of up for it anyway. The EA had other objectives, but it seemed to me that everybody's in the business to try to achieve different things. So cost minimisation versus sustainability versus carbon reduction, etc. And I just felt that what was really required was much clearer direction. I mean, actually, most of what you described as innovation, descriptions of examples of things that were or weren't innovative, but actually a much clearer set of objectives, much clearer sort of funding, much more regulators doing their sort of job, ensuring that the whole of the UK kind of moved towards water reduction in a sort of sensible way, etc. I just wonder whether there should be much more clarity and a requirement to invest in all of this in a much more coherent way that allows projects like waterless systems to be kind of mapped against the kind of a wide set of objectives, like water treatment systems, etc.
Yeah, I can't.
Just hold your response to that.
No, I'm going to forget. I have to answer it now. I shall forget it. But I'll be very quick. I've got a very short memory span. I agree with you about the need for very clear set of targets. And the UK Water Partnership that met this afternoon, the thing that they've decided to do as the first thing is to identify 10 clear targets for the sector, which I found rather reassuring.
You should also make sure that they align.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Some are completely, anathema to one another. They're moving in different directions.
Yes, and I agree. And at one end of the spectrum, you've got the two ends of that spectrum. Somebody might say, well, my innovation target is, phosphate recovery or something, which is somewhere in the middle. And somebody else might say, well, as I said earlier, we've got a new billing system. That's fine. That's great. We've got fewer people in debt or whatever. And other people are talking about some major shift. But they did agree, at least, and the right people around the table, they did agree that they needed to identify about 10 clear targets, big, challenging targets to go for. Yeah.
Gentleman here.
My question is about the natural circulation of water. You said the upstream water.
Sorry, just say that again, will you?
Water circulation in the natural human lives. You said the upstream water or tap water, 75% is leak or lost.
75% leaked.
At one point in the UK, yes, that was true. In cities.
The question is, how many downstream or sewage water is going down?
No, it was the leakages from the pipe network in the middle of cities.
Yeah, but the upstream.
Upstream.
How about the sewage or downstream? Is it leaking?
Oh, you mean dirty water?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I don't think we know. Really, it's not really monitored. Some of it must be, yes, because it's the same age of infrastructure.
And then recently, in order to get the oil or gas from the underground, the industry is putting the water to push out the
Fracking, you're talking about?
fracking.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much water is going to be used compared to the life cycle water we are using in the city?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't think we're going to get fracking tonight.
No,
That's
it's another
something that
another talk.
Joy. We're going to finish with this gentleman here.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Jan Hofman. I'm from the University of Bath, where we have established a new water research center over spanning the whole campus, and we are collaborating with Wessex Water.
Yeah.
They invest in us. They have
3 million.
some seed money for
Yeah.
it. Yes. But my question is maybe very direct. Knowing what you know now and what you have presented, what can you advise me to make that center for successful?
Oh gosh.
Nice short question. I'm going to allow you 2 suggestions.
Well, I only need one because I just had a letter from Tom Arnott inviting me to go and give a talk in your centre in the autumn. So I'm afraid you have to wait for a little while.
I'll have to wait for that. Well, thank you very much, Caroline, indeed.
Thank you.